And so in planning, we need to ask the question, what is this infrastructure for? How is it going to be used? Do we have the resources to acquire it? And what value is it going to bring to our organization? So as you bring infrastructure in, you have to ask the question, does business need this infrastructure? Can we ascertain the value that the organization will get when this infrastructure is set up in our organization? How much will it cost? Can we estimate the return that we are going to get? And then, do we have the resources for that? And so, a framework like KEBS can actually help you set up objectives that can determine, whenever we are planning for our IT infrastructure, we actually have measurable goals and objectives for how this infrastructure is going to be used to deliver value, okay? One of the challenges that we have probably in IT is that we want to buy the latest and greatest equipment just so that we can say we have it. But the question is it providing value for the organization, okay? From a utilization perspective, from a return on investment perspective. And so as IT, we need to start thinking from an infrastructure management perspective that is business-centric, which means we ask the question, what is value for money? Is this infrastructure needed? Do we need the latest and greatest firewall? Is it going to add value to us? Okay. Once we cross the planning phase, then we go into acquisition. And in acquisition, usually one of the things around infrastructure is the decision around whether we are going on-premise or whether we are going cloud. Buy versus rent, okay? Of course, the decisions, and these have been discussed earlier, is that if you're going cloud, you are asking yourself the questions around, we are trading upfront cost for a recurrent cost, okay? We are short of time, which means we want the infrastructure today, and we are not willing to wait for a lead time of months. Then we're asking the question, support. Do we have in-house capacity to manage the infrastructure, or do we want someone else to do it for us? Security. Do we trust a third party to handle our data, or are we more comfortable with the data with us? And so those are the kind of questions. And so during planning, as you're discussing the technology approach, then now we actually implement it during the acquisition phase, where we ask the question, should we go cloud or should we go on premise? There is advantage on both sides, there is disadvantage on both sides. One of the major challenges with going cloud, and a lot of organizations struggle with, is vendor lock-in. It means if that particular cloud vendor is going in a certain trajectory in terms of costs or how their equipment is managed, if you have invested heavily in them and you have tons of data and you've customized your applications based on that cloud platform, then you will struggle, okay? So those are some of the things you need to think about when you are thinking about going to cloud. On-premise has the challenge of maintenance, because that means that you have to keep tracking, what are the patches, the repairs, and all these other things that are required for us to actually deliver value for the business. So acquisition is a difficult question, but it's something that we in IT must help the business make that decision in terms of what is better for us as an organization. Is cloud better? Is on-premise better? Once we've acquired our assets, then now the next question is assignment. And the important thing within IT is to make sure that once those particular IT infrastructure have been acquired, then we register them, okay? And the best way to do it is having an IT asset register. So your IT asset register will have the asset ID, the name, the type, the description, location, the owner, the vendor, the year, even financial information, status information, and the like. So maintaining an asset register is usually the first tier because you need to record where your assets are, okay? Now, remember that finance is recording assets and they maintain what we call a fixed asset register. But in infrastructure management, we in IT need our own register, okay? And good practice would be that whatever system we're using to manage our IT infrastructure should be able to gather data automatically from the system that procurement is using for fixed asset register. And so usually what we say is try your best to have an automatic integration between procurement's ERP asset register and IT's IT management asset register. What does that do? It guarantees that anytime an asset is procured in the organization for IT and has been registered in the fixed asset register, then that data automatically flows into the IT asset register. Then what does that mean for you? The only thing is now you add the assignment information. If this laptop is going to Purity, then in the IT asset register, I mark that this asset has been assigned to Purity, and we can track the journey. If it is a server that is going into the data center, then whoever it is who is our data center manager or infrastructure manager is assigned the owner. And so that means that whatever teams we have, if we look at the ICT asset register, we know someone was assigned that asset. They own it and are responsible for it. And every time we make a change in assignment, so for instance, Purity is the organization, and her replacement joins, and her replacement is being assigned the same laptop. Then on the asset register, we need to update it such that it shows this asset used to belong to Purity, now has moved to someone else. Can we do that with Excel? That will be tricky. So as IT, we need to also ask ourselves the question, do our systems allow us to track IT assignment through different users? Not just for purposes of management, but even for security, because we need to tell who was the person who was assigned this asset and what was this asset used for. And so maintaining an asset register is very important in our maturity journey for infrastructure management. And then comes the question of utilization. It's very important that when we invest in IT infrastructure, they are put to use, because that is where value is extracted, okay? So it's very important to be able to say confidently to the business, what is the percentage of IT infrastructure that is in use, okay? Do we know it? Do we report it? Is it something that business is looking for? You know, sometimes in IT, there is a budget, we buy people iPads, tablets, we assign. And nobody knows, was that tablet ever turned on? Is it in use? Is it providing value? So as IT, we need, from infrastructure management, to ask the question, is it in use? If we bought servers, if we bought UPSs, if we bought switches, if we bought IoT devices, the question to always be asking as an IT from an infrastructure management question is, do we know the utilization? And so these practices that are defined in ITIL can help us think about the utilization of IT assets. Deployment is key, because usually that's the first stop. Because when IT is assigned the infrastructure, we configure it and then it is put to use. Okay? If it is a server, then we host a database on it, we host an application, and then we provide access for users. So we need to ask the question, what is our deployment practice? Okay? Usually at the start, we go for manual deployment. And in manual deployment, we have siloed teams, network team, facilities team, data center team, applications teams, and the like. Each team is managing their infrastructure independently. Then they build manually, which means we download the softwares and the drivers and the libraries that are needed for a particular infrastructure. We install them physically, and then we do testing, manual tests, and then we do a manual deployment, which means on that particular infrastructure, we go in and we do the installation manually. Now, for those who are appreciative of new ways of working, like Agile and DevOps, will realize that manual processes take time, okay? And if you're in an industry that is fast moving, then manual processes will be a challenge, especially in the competitive world, okay? Maybe this might not be the case if you work in a government agency, because a lot of government agencies don't have competition. So you're not thinking about the speed of deployment of infrastructure. But if you're working in private sector where competition is playing a significant role, then you understand that the speed at which you deploy a new feature or a new service will give your organization competitive edge. And that now directly translates to value, okay? So you need to ask the question whether, if we are doing manual deployment, is it of value to our organization, depending on the speed of our industry. If you are at a high-speed industry, then you adopt Agile and DevOps ways of working, which allow us to turn everything within the deployment journey into automation. How does it work? We do Agile teams. So instead of having separate teams handing to each other, what we do is we set up cross-functional teams. So you have a dedicated product team, which has a network person, which has a database person, which has a server administration person, which has an end user support person. That means there is no handover. That means the teams work together and all of them are working towards a common goal. And then we automate the build, we automate the test, we automate the deployment, and we automate the provisioning. And so the modern tools that exist, and especially driven by many of the cloud vendors, will actually help you perform, build, test, deploy, and provisioning in an automated way, which allows you to crash the time this is done, and then, of course, directly lead to value, okay? The other thing to think about is whether we understand how the individual infrastructure contributes to overall services, okay? And one of the things in best practice that we talk about is having what we call service models, okay? So a service model is simply a diagrammatic description of how all your different IT infrastructure contribute to an overall service, okay? If you have this picture, then it is very easy for you to implement changes safely. It is very easy for you to troubleshoot incidents and identify opportunities for improvement, okay? Configuration modeling or service modeling is usually one of the advanced sciences in infrastructure management, because it means that you as an organization must invest in tools that can automatically draw for you your configurations, such that in this particular regard, we already know if there is an issue with the service, we can troubleshoot. Is it a data center issue? Is it a server issue, a storage issue? Is it a client device issue? If you don't have visibility on your service models, you will struggle, because this is where service performance, service availability is affected most. And so good practice is to invest in service management tools and then draw service models for the different services you offer. Once you have those service models or the architectures, then you are able to relate changes, relate incidents, and any other activities that are happening that may impact on the utilization of your IT asset. ISO 20000 talks about the kind of records you need to have in configuration management. At least you should have the ID, the type, the description, the dependencies, and the status. And now if you have a configuration management system, information such as dependencies and status is better identified through automated systems as opposed to manual. Okay? So that is something that we need to endeavor to reach a point in which do we know our configuration information, and do we have a process of auditing our configuration information regularly? Best practice says you should perform configuration audits of your infrastructure at a regular intervals, okay? Good organizations will make sure that at least monthly or at most quarterly, somebody sits down and asks, this diagram and qua ground, is there a difference, okay? If there is a difference, it means that either we are not updating our configuration models correctly, or there are some people making changes to our infrastructure without following the standard process. So it's very important for us to have a formalized configuration management process, because without this, you cannot do effective incident management, you cannot do effective change management, and that means you cannot deliver good value for the services you offer. And then monitoring comes into place, because we must make sure we know the status of the infrastructure and whether or not it is delivering value. We must know, is the router providing for us the bandwidth that is provisioned? We need to check, are the switch ports working? We need to check, is the application meeting the performance metrics in terms of CPU, in terms of memory, in terms of database queries? We need to be checking those things. And so monitoring is key. At a bare minimum, we give the responsibility of monitoring to us system administrators. As your organization grows, then what you need to do is to invest in what we call a NOC, a Network Operations Center. And that means that you have dedicated people who do monitoring. Then they use specialized tools to be able to monitor CPU, monitor memory, monitor uptime, monitor response time, monitor transaction times, monitor the things that can tell us whether or not we are getting value from our infrastructure. Usually in monitoring, we talk about 3 types of events: informational, warning, and exception. Whenever we configure our infrastructure, it's very important for us to agree internally what is the level of warning that we want. Because warning allows us time to fix potential problems before they cause an outage. Usually you'll find vendors will already have set some of these things to default. It's very important within IT to ask the question, is the threshold set by the vendor good enough for us? Okay? Or do we need to optimize that threshold to give us an earlier warning? Which means if the vendor has set a threshold of 80%, maybe for us internally we know by the time we fix it, the system will already be down. So as IT, we probably prefer an earlier threshold, like 60% or 70%. Then we set it. And then that means that when we get a warning, our teams need to know, when we see a warning, we don't ignore, we actually take action. And then it's very important for you to run analytics on your events, because the worst case scenario is when you only respond when your tickets are, when the alerts are red, which is exception. That means your customers or users of IT systems